Welcome back to Channel 19 Mysteries. I'm your host, Midnight Rider. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of absolute isolation? Out where the comforting glow of city lights can't reach you, and the only sound is the rhythmic hum of your own engine pushing through the freezing dark, the mind can easily play tricks on you. But what happens when the glowing anomaly pursuing you through the dead of winter isn't a trick of the mind at all? What happens when it tracks your every move, defying the very laws of physics? Tonight, we are journeying into the frozen, unforgiving heart of the Alaskan interior to unravel a terrifying mystery from 1986, a night when a predator of pure, silent energy visited the desolate ice roads and the empty skies. Before we turn off the headlights and plunge into the darkness, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below letting me know if you've ever seen something you couldn't explain on a lonely stretch of road. Now, let's get into tonight's story. Trapped at 40 below, a terrifying UFO encounter. If you have a map of North America handy, go ahead and trace your finger up the left side of the continent until you reach the massive, sprawling landmass of Alaska. Now, keep going north, past the coastal cities and tourist stops, deep into the center of the state. You will eventually hit a vast, empty expanse known as the interior. It is a place of breathtaking beauty, with mountain ranges that look like jagged teeth biting into the sky and forests that stretch on for eternity. But it is also a place that wants to kill you. The cold here isn't just a temperature. It is a living, breathing entity. It seeks out the smallest gap in your coat, the tiniest crack in a window seal. And in the winter, the darkness is relentless. The sun is more of a suggestion than a reality, dipping below the horizon in the early afternoon and leaving the world bathed in a bruised purple twilight that quickly fades into a pitch black void. On November 17th, 1986, that void was particularly heavy. The date is important because on this specific night, the skies over Alaska were busy. But we aren't talking about commercial airliners or military drills. We are talking about something that, to this day, defies every logical explanation we have for how the world works. Our story centers on two men. One was on the ground, navigating the treacherous ice-slicked roads of the interior. The other was in the air, thousands of feet above the tundra. They didn't know each other. They had no way of communicating, and yet their lives were about to intersect in a way that would leave them both questioning their own sanity. Let's start with the man on the ground. We will call him Ray. Ray was a long-haul trucker, a breed of person who is built differently than the rest of us. To drive the Elliott Highway in the dead of winter, you have to be comfortable with solitude. You have to be okay with the fact that if your engine quits, or if you slide off the road into a snowbank, help isn't just a phone call away. It could be hours or even days before someone finds you. And in temperatures that hover around 30 or 40 degrees below zero, hours are a luxury you don't have. On the night of November 17th, 1986, Ray was pushing his rig up a steep, winding grade, about 100 miles west of Fairbanks. The Elliott Highway is less of a highway and more of a rugged, winding snake of a road that connects the civilized world to the remote outpost of Manly Hot Springs. It's paved in some spots, gravel in others, and in November, it is almost entirely covered in a sheet of hard-packed ice and snow. Ray was tired. The heater in his cab was blasting, fighting a losing war against the cold, pressing against the glass. The drone of the diesel engine was the only sound in the world, a constant rhythmic grumble that usually lulled drivers into a trance. He checked his mirrors. Left side, blackness. Right side, blackness. He looked out the windshield. The high beams cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, illuminating the snow-caked spruce trees that lined the road like silent sentinels. He took a sip of his lukewarm coffee and shifted gears, preparing for the incline. He checked his mirrors again. This time, the left mirror wasn't empty. At first, Ray's brain tried to make sense of it. He assumed it was another trucker. Maybe someone he hadn't noticed coming up behind him, pushing hard to make a delivery to Manly before the weather turned. He watched the light in the rear view. expecting to see the telltale twin beams of headlights bouncing up and down as the truck behind him hit the frost heaves and potholes that plagued the road. But the light didn't bounce. It wasn't white, and it wasn't yellow. It was a brilliant, pulsating blue-green. It looked like someone had bottled the northern lights and compressed them into a sphere. And it was moving with an impossible smoothness. It didn't jitter or shake. It glided as if it were on a rail, or as if it wasn't touching the ground at all. Ray frowned, leaning forward over the steering wheel, squinting into the side mirror. The light was getting closer. Fast. Much faster than any semi-truck could handle on these curves. Crazy fool, Ray muttered to himself. He reached for his CB radio mic, intending to call out to the driver behind him. He wanted to tell them to back off, to slow down before they killed themselves. He keyed the mic. Breaker 19. You got a copy on the southbound rig? Silence. Ray released the button and waited. Usually, there's a bit of chatter, or at least the ambient hiss of the open channel. But the moment he let go of the button, a wall of static erupted from the speaker. It wasn't the normal crackle of interference. It was a loud, rhythmic screeching, almost mechanical, that vibrated the glass in his side mirrors. It was so loud he had to reach over and physically turn the volume knob down to save his ears. He looked back at the mirror. The blue-green orb was right on his bumper now. It flooded the cab of his truck with an eerie, aquatic light. Ray could see the stitching on his steering wheel, the coffee stains on his dashboard, all illuminated in this ghost light. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. This wasn't a truck. There was no grill, no cab, no tires. It was just light. Pure, contained energy. Suddenly, the light surged. Ray gripped the wheel, bracing for an impact. He thought this thing, whatever it was going to ram the back of his trailer. But it didn't pass him on the left, and it didn't hit him. It went up. Ray watched, his mouth falling open, as the orb detached itself from the road behind him and climbed vertically into the sky. It moved with a speed that made Ray's stomach drop just watching it. It didn't accelerate like a plane or a helicopter. It simply existed in one spot and then existed in another spot, 1,000 feet higher. Through the top of his windshield, Ray watched the orb, which now looked like a molten marble of emerald fire, shoot toward the mountains. It was heading away from the road, soaring over the peaks, heading directly into the flight path of the only other soul who was crazy enough to be out there that night. Thousands of feet above Ray, George Layman was sitting in the cockpit of his Cessna 207. George was a veteran pilot. In Alaska, that title means something. It means you have survived. It means you know how to read the weather better than a meteorologist. It means you know that the mountains don't care about your flight plan, and the wind doesn't care about your fuel gauge. George was the kind of guy who didn't rattle easily. He had flown through whiteout blizzards where the world disappeared into a sheet of milk. He had landed on strips of gravel and ice that were so short they would make most commercial pilots lose their lunch. But on this particular Monday evening, George was feeling good. The air was smooth. The engine was humming that steady, reassuring note that every pilot loves. He was on a routine mail and supply run to Manly Hot Springs, a tiny settlement nestled at the end of the Elliott Highway. He checked his gauges. Airspeed, normal. Altitude, steady. Oil pressure, green. He adjusted the trim slightly, leaning back in his seat. The cabin was dark, illuminated only by the soft red glow of the instrument panel. Outside, the world was a vast carpet of black velvet, punctuated by the occasional distant glimmer of a star. George was scanning the horizon, looking for the lights of Manly, when the cockpit suddenly lit up. It wasn't a gradual brightening. It was instantaneous. It was as if someone had turned on a stadium floodlight directly behind his head. The interior of the Cessna, usually a shadowed cocoon, was suddenly washed in a blinding, stark light. George flinched, his hands tightening on the yoke. His first instinct was to check his instruments. Was there an electrical fire? Had a flare gone off? But the light wasn't coming from the panel. It was coming from outside. He craned his neck, looking out the left side window. His breath caught in his throat. There, hovering just off his wingtip, was a craft. And we have to use the word craft loosely here, because it didn't look like any machine George had ever seen in Jane's Defense Weekly or at any air show. It had no wings. It had no tail. It had no visible engines, no propellers, no exhaust. It was a giant metallic sphere, roughly the size of a 2-story house. It was so close that George could see the reflection of his own navigation lights on its surface. The object glowed with an internal intensity, a pulsating energy that seemed to come from within the metal itself. It lit up the sky around them, casting long, dancing shadows over the snow-covered peaks below. George's mind raced. He was a rational man, a technical man. He tried to categorize what he was seeing. Was it a military test? The Air Force had bases in Alaska. Maybe this was some new, top-secret surveillance balloon? But balloons drift. They don't pace an aircraft doing 140 knots. He banked the Cessna slightly to the right, trying to put some distance between himself and the object. The object moved with him. It stayed perfectly locked off his wingtip, as if they were connected by an invisible steel bar. George began to sweat. The cabin of a Cessna in winter is usually drafty and cold, but he could feel perspiration beating on his forehead. He realized, with a jolt of primal fear, that this thing was massive. If it touched him, if it even created a wake of turbulence, it would swat his small plane out of the sky like a fly. He grabbed the radio mic, his knuckles white. Fairbanks Center, this is Cessna, November 4, 602. I have. Company. Do you have any traffic in my sector? He waited. The seconds stretched out agonizingly long. He kept his eyes glued to the sphere, terrified that if he looked away, it would make its move. The radio crackled to life. The voice of the air traffic controller in Fairbanks was calm, professional, and utterly confused. Cessna 02, say again. We have you on primary radar, but you're the only blip in the sky for 50 miles. What are you seeing? George felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan winter. Center, I am looking at. I don't know what I'm looking at. It's huge. It's off my left wing. It's glowing green. You don't see anything else on the scope? Negative, 02. The scope is clear. Are you sure it's not a reflection? Or the moon? George almost laughed. A hysterical, terrified laugh. It's not the moon, Center. This thing is right next to me. It is matching my speed and heading. As if the object heard him, it decided to put on a show. The sphere dropped back, sliding behind the tail of the Cessna. George lost sight of it for a heartbeat, his head swiveling, trying to find it. Then it shot forward. It didn't accelerate. It just appeared in front of him. It stopped on a dime, hovering directly in his flight path. George yanked back on the yoke, instinctively trying to climb over it, but the object mimicked his move. It danced around him. It would dart forward, stop, drop below him, and then reappear on his wing. It was playing with him. It was ignoring every law of inertia that George understood. To move that fast, to stop that suddenly, the G-forces inside that sphere would turn a human pilot into jelly. But the scariest part wasn't the speed. It was the silence. George's engine was roaring, but he could feel the presence of the object. It was silent, massive, heavy, and silent. It felt like a predator. It felt like a shark circling a swimmer, curious and dangerous. Down on the ground, the show was not going unnoticed. Ray, the trucker, had pulled his rig over to the side of the Elliott Highway. He wasn't the only one. 2 other trucks had stopped, their drivers standing in the middle of the road, oblivious to the sub-zero temperatures. They stood in their heavy parkas, their breath pluming in the air, necks craned toward the stars. From the ground, the scene was surreal. They could see the small, steady light of the Cessna, a speck of humanity against the vastness of the cosmos. And right next to it, dwarfing it, was the massive, glowing emerald orb. Ray watched as the green light darted around the plane. It looked like a firefly buzzing around a moth. What is that? One of the other drivers whispered. He sounded like he was in church. I don't know, Ray said, his voice trembling. But that pilot, whoever is up there, he's in trouble. They watched the dance continue for several minutes. The object would close in, bathing the plane in light, and then back off, fading into a dull red color before flaring green again. It was as if the object was scanning the plane, studying it, dissecting it with sensors that were beyond human comprehension. Back in the cockpit, George was running out of options. He was nearing Manly Hot Springs. He could see the faint lights of the outposts in the distance. He wondered if this thing would follow him down. Would it land? Would it crash into him before he could get to the runway? "Fairbanks, I'm initiating my descent," George said, his voice tight. "The object is still with me. It's pacing me." "Copy, 02. We are notifying the authorities. Keep us posted." Authorities? George thought. What are the authorities going to do? Send a sheriff to write it a parking ticket? He was alone up here. He began to drop altitude, banking toward the airstrip. The sphere stayed with him, dropping effortlessly. George braced himself. He was low now. If something went wrong, he had no room to recover. Then, just as George reached the airspace directly over Manly Hot Springs, the object did something impossible. It didn't fly away. It didn't turn and burn toward the horizon. It simply ceased to be. 1 second, it was there, a massive, tangible object, casting a shadow of the Cessna onto the clouds below. It was as real as the yoke in George's hands. And the next second, it collapsed in on itself. It shrank into a single blinding point of white light and then streaked upward. It didn't go across the sky. It went out of the sky. It shot straight up, exiting the atmosphere in less than a heartbeat. It left no trail, no sonic boom, no sign that it had ever been there. The sky was suddenly dark again. The only light came from the stars and the dim glow of the instrument panel. George sat there, stunned, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was breathing hard, gasping for air as if he had just run a marathon. He looked around, empty sky, just the mountains and the dark. He lined up the runway. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the yoke steady. He brought the Cessna down, the wheels kissing the frozen gravel of the Manly airstrip. He taxied to the small hangar, cut the engine, and sat there. The silence of the Alaskan night rushed back in. But this time, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. It felt like the silence of a room after a scream has just ended. George opened the door and stepped out onto the permafrost. The cold air hit him like a slap in the face, grounding him. He looked up at the sky one more time, half expecting to see the green eye looking back at him. Nothing. He wasn't alone for long. A group of locals who had seen the lights from the ground came running over. A couple of truckers, including Ray, had just pulled into the outpost and joined the group. They stood in a semicircle around the pilot, their faces pale in the beams of their flashlights. "Did you see it?" Ray asked. His voice was rough, trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "Please tell me you saw it." George looked at the trucker. He looked at the locals. He saw the fear in their eyes, the desperate need for validation. They needed to know they weren't crazy. George couldn't even speak. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him weak. He just nodded. "I saw it," he whispered. "I saw it." The Federal Aviation Administration would later investigate the incident. This wasn't just a campfire story. It was a documented aviation event. They pulled the radar tapes from the time of the sighting. They interviewed George Layman. They interviewed the truckers. The radar data was confusing. While the primary radar at Fairbanks hadn't painted a solid target in the way it paints a 747, there were anomalies. There were clutter returns, ghost signals that appeared and disappeared in the exact sector where George was flying. But the official report? It offered no explanations. It ruled out weather balloons. The wind data didn't match the object's movements. It ruled out swamp gas. Swamp gas doesn't fly at 140 knots at 5,000 feet. It ruled out experimental aircraft. There were no military exercises scheduled in that sector on November 17th, 1986. The report ended with a question mark. George Layman continued to fly. You don't just stop being a pilot because of one bad night. But he never looked at the sky the same way again. Every time he flew at night, every time he saw a star flicker or a reflection on the glass, his heart would skip a beat. And as for Ray and the other truckers, they kept driving on the Elliott Highway. They kept hauling supplies to the edge of the world. But they developed a new habit. When they drove the night shift, they spent a lot more time looking in the rearview mirrors. To this day, the people who were on the road and in the air on November 17th, 1986, don't talk much about that night. It's an unspoken agreement. Because in Alaska, people know that the wilderness isn't just space. It is vast, and it is old, and it keeps its secrets. Sometimes that space is occupied by things that don't belong to us. And sometimes, if you are very unlucky, those things decide to come down and take a look at you. So, the next time you look up at the night sky and see a satellite tracking slowly across the stars, or the blinking lights of an airplane, just remember George Layman. Remember that not everything that flies has wings, and not everything that glows is a star. And if you ever find yourself driving alone on a dark road in the middle of nowhere, and you see a strange light in your rearview mirror, maybe don't stop. Just keep driving, and pray it doesn't get curious. What do you think was stalking George and Ray in the freezing Alaskan sky? A classified military experiment, or something from far beyond our world? Let me know your theories down in the comments below. If this story sent a chill down your spine, please hit that like button and subscribe to Channel 19 Mysteries. Turn on those notifications so you never miss a ride into the unknown. Your support helps keep the headlights on and the strange stories coming. Do you have a terrifying true story of your own? Whether it's a UFO sighting, a brush with the paranormal, or just a creepy encounter on a lonely stretch of road, I want to hear about it. Send your experiences to mycreepyencounter@gmail.com, and your story might just be featured in an upcoming video. I'm your host, Midnight Rider. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies, check your rearview mirrors, and as always, stay safe out there.